there is this idea that, listen, you need to learn as you go. You need to get started, and you need to get started sooner than later. And you don't have a crystal ball to know the future. And that's also with your health. So you have way more risk not doing than you have. I mean, the risk of not doing is, so the risk of doing is may lose my capital, but the risk of not doing is I risk my entire future.
Welcome to the Accelerated Investor Podcast with Josh Cantwell. If you love entrepreneurship and investing in real estate, then you are in the right place. Josh is the CEO of Freeland Ventures Real Estate Private Equity and has personally invested in well over 500 properties all across the country. He's also made hundreds of private lender loans and owns over 1,000 units of apartments. Josh is an expert at raising private money for deals, and he prides himself on never having had a boss in his entire adult life. Josh and his team also mentor investors and entrepreneurs from all over the world. He doesn't dream about doing deals. He actually does them, and so do his listeners and students. Now sit back, listen, learn, and accelerate your business, your life, and your investing with the Accelerated Investor Podcast.
So hey guys, welcome back to Accelerated Investor. This is Josh. I am so excited that you're here today. Just again, ripping through some podcast interviews. I just got back from Florida, took about 30 days out with my wife and kids, and just really enjoying the summertime and spending some time with my family down there, deep sea fishing, going on catamarans, taking bike rides to the beach, having a few cocktails. So I'm happy to be back and recording and having fun with you today. I'm interviewing a new friend of mine. His name is AJ Osbourne. AJ is a phenomenal guy. You're going to hear in this interview. He is a survivor of what is called GuillainBarre Syndrome, which attacked his body and made him paralyzed for almost 3 or 4 months. Spent many years going through rehab, both physical therapy, speech therapy, and all different kinds of therapy. AJ today owns over 8,000 units of self-storage, also owns a commercial real estate brokerage. He's got over $100 million portfolio of cash flowing assets, primarily in self-storage. He's got a brand new book out, and this is a phenomenal interview that you're going to hear about some advice that AJ would give to his younger former self. You'll hear how AJ got started in real estate. You'll hear about AJ's primary money-making strategy, which is self-storage. And also you'll hear how he's about to pull out $8 million in tax-free loan proceeds from a refinance that he's doing. So I hope you love it. Enjoy this next episode of Accelerated Investor. So hey guys, welcome back to Accelerated Investor. I'm so excited to be with all of you today. Today I have a very special guest. His name is AJ Osbourne. AJ has a phenomenal podcast of his own. He owns over 8,000 units of self-storage, over 1 million square feet. And we are going to talk today with him about his life as a real estate investor. We're going to talk about cash flow, and we're going to talk about raising private capital. But specifically, he's got a brand new book out, just launched it. It's already a bestseller, all about investing in self-storage. AJ Osbourne, welcome. And thank you for joining me on Accelerated Investor. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet, man. So I always like to start with our guests to talk a little bit about what's going on right now in your business today. Obviously, we're still in the middle of COVID, but I'd love to talk with our guests about what's a deal, what's a business, what's a transaction, or a management of a building that you're currently working on right now. Tell us what you're excited about. You're working on right now, today, this week, this month.
So, with the massive compression in cap rates and just cash everywhere, trying to find somewhere to go, we're actually trying to look at some different things. So we've converted bankruptcy for Kmart's into self-storage, and I've got 3 under contract right now that we're doing. So we're in the middle of working on those, and also moving over into a different asset class of an industrial space that has extremely high demand, yet there's just nobody in that space or going out of it. It very much feels like storage was in the 90s and early 2000s. It's very much overlooked. And so we are also looking at 3 large projects to build out industrial warehousing for businesses.
Got it. So your money-making strategy, as we were kind of getting ready for this podcast, you mentioned you own brokerages, commercial investing, but your kind of backbone is in self-storage. So
100%,
just tell us a little bit more about that. Tell our audience, we've had some other self-storage experts and guests on the podcast, but tell us about your flavor of self-storage. How do you invest in it? How do you find it? Are you doing value-add improvements? Or are you buying stabilized buildings? Are you syndicating them and raising capital? Tell us about, you've probably done a little bit of everything, but tell us about your favorite strategy for making money in self-storage.
Yep, I've done pretty much everything in self-storage, small, large, conversions, build ground up. But really my favorite type of self-storage is the value-add prospect. We buy underperforming assets and turn them around. Nice. It adds an element of what I call money on the table, and that's measurable gains that are not being taken. They're sitting there, they're just not being taken. And so that strategy is extremely effective, reliable, low risk, and we can get our money out quick and redeploy it so we can grow. But obviously the name of the game changes, and it changes a lot. So deals are harder to come by. We're big into conversions. We're very nervous about oversupplied markets, which there are a lot of. Those are the dangers. Self-storage, the downside to self-storage is overbuilt. It's very easy to overbuild self-storage, and it's happening all over the country right now. So for us, we really are looking at overlooked markets. I don't want to, the hot, city of the day or whatever. We try to avoid those things. And with that, you have a reliable asset type that will produce great returns. So I do build, I do convert, but my favorite, hands down, is buying existing and improving the operations and increasing the cash flow. I look for a 20% cash on cash return, or I don't buy it. So it's, that's been our mode of operations, taken us from, 0 to over 100 million in assets, and it's worked really well.
Nice. So you mentioned avoiding markets that are overbuilt, and you mentioned how easy it is to overbuild in a market. Just comment on that, because I'm thinking about, you mentioned like Kmart's, right? So there's obviously a lot of bankrupt Kmart's everywhere that are almost not like big boxes near a mall, but they're anchor stores in strip centers primarily. And I can think of one in my old hometown where I grew up that's bankrupt, sitting there, it's vacant. So I'm curious to see what kind of things you look at to evaluate those deals, to see if a market is undersaturated, oversaturated, or just right. So help us understand that.
Yeah, really, this is the self-storage. I'm obviously obsessed with it. I love it. I think it has more runway than any other real estate asset class. It's new in its lifespan. It's probably a teenager, right? Most other asset classes are very matured. They're ran by institutions where 70+% of all storage facilities are mom and pop single operators. So the runway to buy and to grow in self-storage is really good for new investors as well as experienced investors like myself. And the economics of self-storage are improving, getting better, and will continue to, because real estate prices go up. Our ability to consume is dropping. Walmart, then you have Amazon. It's just those economics are very, very good, as well as the disbursement of office space and retail, where businesses need to house things. You're trying to solve problems like last mile, so they need space. And it's just not feasible to build for a lot of these companies, because I need, whatever it is, 100 square feet. It's just not feasible to build that and own it, and that may change. So the economics are really good, but the one downside storage has is the fact that it's very subject to being overbuilt. There's lower barriers of entry, and the information is not good. And so you have people that own a field and they're going to go build 100,000 square feet. And when you ask them, why did you think this spot was a good spot? And the answer is, because I own the land. Nothing else.
It was easy.
There's nothing. Yeah, exactly. And you have a lot of people that do that, or they say the long-term gains of it are good. And they view it as a very easy asset class to run, because they say there's no toilets.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like the same answers, AJ, you'd hear for residential. Like, I bought this house because it was in my backyard. or
Bingo.
I bought this rental property because it just looked like a good deal. There's not a lot of like the real deep analysis that you might do on a value add apartment deal or, commercial deal or something like that. A lot of the things you gave me, it strikes me as like, wow, you got a lot of mom and pops in that space that just own 6 acres of land and they're going to build.
And they're going to build it.
And it's cheap and you got to throw up electrical and some garage doors
and they view it
you're
as
done.
Easy.
Yeah.
Yep. Which is not a bad thing because those are all my potential sellers. So I buy from those people, right? Because then they get in trouble. And they're like, hold on, I didn't understand. I thought this was easy. When what they fundamentally didn't understand is self-storage acts more as retail than it does anything else. So you need to have very good marketing strategy. You need to have revenue management. You need to have dynamic pricing. You need to have all these things really lined up. And if you don't, your competitors are. So in self-storage, we're competing with the self-storage down the road. I'm literally trying to take your tenants from you. It's not like apartment buildings where you get a year lease up. It's month to month. Once the slow season comes, the busy season comes up, I'm trying to take tenants. I'm, the best operator wins. So with that said, it's, as you get better in self-storage, the odds of you being more successful and all that really improves. And for a new person getting into it, as long as they can avoid overbuilt markets, they're generally going to be fine. Buy right and don't build in overbuilt markets, right? I generally tell people to stay away from ones where they have large regional players or REITs that are really, really good. If it's your first time getting into it, make sure you understand the data in self-storage, though, is not nearly as good as a lot of the other asset classes. So it takes a little work to make sure that those things aren't overbuilt. A lot of people will buy and they didn't understand that the guy that's selling it to them was selling it because somebody down the street is building 150,000 square feet of storage. And you didn't know that, and you buy it. And then next year, there's a huge mass inventory on the market, and that lowers prices. So
are there some shortcuts, AJ, to finding that data?
Yes.
You said, because in the apartment space, it's so readily available through CoStar, through underwriting. That's easy. That's my space. We own 2,600 units of apartments. We've got, commercial lender at Marcus and Millichap that's got all this data at his fingertips. But you've said a couple times it's not that way necessarily in self-storage. But you obviously do a lot of your own due diligence to make sure you buy the right deal and you're not overbuilt. So what are some shortcuts there?
The great thing about self-storage is they're really easy to find. I mean, if you're in a second or third tier market, if you're not in LA, things like that, the bigger the market, the better the data is. And you can utilize data aggregators. Like, we have our version of CoStar and things in self-storage. And the bigger the market, so if I go to LA, those services are going to be fairly accurate. The moment you walk into second, third tier markets, anything of it starts to not be. But if you use those and then just literally Google Earth it, I mean, self-storage facilities are big. They kind of stand out. Right? It's not something you need. So if I take a 3-mile radius of whatever I want to buy, wherever, I start lining up, going online, finding all the storage facilities, and then I find all the ones that aren't marketing. And then from there, I call up the city planning and zoning. I want to know exactly what land has been approved to build on and what current existing properties are in the pipeline or going to be built. So that way I understand current existing as well as incoming. And I'm looking at a square foot per capita. So how many square feet per capita are on the market? And then out of that square foot, what does the occupancy look like? What is demand for that square foot? And that's how you really determine current demand, and then future demand depends on what's in the pipeline, what's going to be coming up, and how much square footage that'll add to the market and what effect that'll have on rental rates.
Nice. My newest and most powerful real estate investing book, The Flip System, is now available. And for a limited time, you can grab your free copy at getflipsystem.com/podcast. Using the same proven principles, secrets, and investing strategies I'm sharing in this book, I've been able to personally close over 750 highly profitable real estate deals over the last 15 years, make over 400 private lender loans, raise over $30 million of private money, and acquire over 2,000 units of apartments. Get my newest book now for free for a limited time at getflipsystem.com/podcast. That's getflipsystem.com/podcast. So help our listeners if they maybe are an apartment investor raising capital, maybe single family, and they're like, hey, I'm really interested in learning more about self-storage. I don't know that I have the operational capacity or the ability to raise money, but maybe I can go source deals and send them off to someone like AJ. What is the type, describe the ideal deal that you'd be finding? Maybe use a recent case study that you're really proud of. Tell us about that. So if our audience could go find a deal like that, they know that, they're going to be in the ballpark. It's something worth doing some due diligence on.
Yeah, there's a bunch of case studies that I have, and you can find it. And in my book that you mentioned previously, I literally map out all the case studies and I talk about why those deals are great. But to keep it short and sweet, I'm really looking for over 60,000 square feet. And I want not professional management. I don't want the REITs. I don't want major players to be running it because I want upside. I actually want a facility that's not being ran that great, so I can have that upside and I can turn it around. And then I'm looking at facilities that have high demand. I want something where they are most of the time not doing anything because they don't need to. I've been 100% full for 5 years, and so I don't even care. I'm not touching it, right? That's wonderful. I don't want somebody that's doing a really good job and they can't get above 80% occupancy. That's bad. There's nowhere to go with that because they're fighting against oversupplied or whatever that may be. So if it's on a main road and a 3-mile radius has I don't need no competition, but competition that's okay. And I have a facility that isn't being ran what I would suggest is great, meaning they don't have a good marketing strategy. They're not adding insurance. They're not doing all these other lines and services or dynamic pricing. And that's 60,000+ square feet. For the most part, I'm looking at that. I want to see that. I want to look at how well that will do. And when I'm looking at bankrupt super Kmarts, I'm looking for good positions in cities for big box stores that have been sitting empty and are ready to sell. That gets us on a main road. So I look a lot at those, and the reason being is after a while they're going to come back down to reality because the shift in retail to a new asset, this is hard for owners. They're pricing these assets based upon what they used to do, which doesn't make sense anymore. And so they have to come to grips with the new reality, and I got to work with those owners to get them to understand the new reality of what they're asking. It's like, well, you got me and then nobody else. So this is what this asset will perform and what its value is to me. That therefore now that's the new value, right? So self-storage can fit a lot of those, but two, I need it to be, we've taken assets down to where they would have sold for 18, 20 million and we're buying them at 6 or 5.
Nice.
Because we can't pencil it if it's, over. So this can be a hard, long drawn process. And the sellers may sit on these assets for 8 years until they finally go, okay, I get it. It's not, it's not, that market doesn't not going to work.
Got it. So in apartments and, even in residential, you're looking at a couple different ways to make money. So potentially an acquisition fee, potentially purchase it, putting in your value add improvements, cash out refi proceeds, net free cash flow, and then equity. So is, in your mind, is a perfect self-storage deal very similar to that, where you're buying it, looking to acquire it, do the value add improvements? If you're going to syndicate it, have investors that invest, try to refinance them out of the deal within, let's say, 2 to 4 years. Help me understand what an ideal looks like from a cash flow perspective for you. Yeah. And if you have investors coming in that, put up your equity capital, what does a typical deal look like for them on the deals that you've done in the past?
So when I'm looking at deals, I'm really looking at two things. First of all, I want cash flow day one. If I'm buying it and it's not cash flowing well, I don't even want it. And then after I improve it, it needs to be a home run. And so what we generally look at is buying it, turning around year 3, refining out, paying back investors, and they either stay in the deal or they don't, depending on the investment and what we're doing. Right now we have 2 going on. They're going to Yes, they're going to stay in. So we give them 100% return and then they get to stay in the deal. So we look at that on a case-by-case scenario, but our general mode of operations is that we either will convert, build, or buy. And then in 3 years, we are returning capital back. And then we're just going to have infinite returns, which we refi with non-recourse loans. We shift the risk off of us. And then it becomes more like for the investors, mailbox money. And then for us, our capital's returned and the risk has been shifted.
Fantastic. Yeah. Very, very, very similar to what we do with our apartments. We primarily invest in B class. Sometimes it's A-, sometimes it's C+, but B class, which has proven to be fairly COVID proof as well, which has been nice. So I want to ask you about, how you got started in real estate and then ultimately how you ended up in self-storage and some of these other things you're doing. But before I go there, just give us a little bit of commentary. Has COVID helped your business? It hurt your business? How has it affected all the things that you're doing?
Definitely hasn't helped. Really, the problem with COVID is timing. So COVID happened in the springtime, and in self-storage for most markets in the United States, there's seasonality. Yeah, if you're in Southern California, they really don't have seasonality.
Right.
And maybe downtown Miami, things like that. But for the rest of the United States, there's very much a harvest season in self-storage, and that's springtime. And so you've got 4 months where that's when you're getting people in. That's when you're replacing the move-outs during the fall and winter. That's when you're making hay. And that evaporated, obviously.
Sure.
In a lot of states we were in, we couldn't even operate. So when you're fighting with the government, it's a losing battle. And so, that doesn't play out well. Now, with that said, we're not at all hurting. It's just we just readjusted our expectations. Instead of 8 to 12% increase in gross revenue, we're like, okay, we'll be maybe flat. But also that's presented opportunities for us to buy because buyers just evaporated. And so I've got more deals under contract than I have in the last 4 years.
Right.
Because all the people that were on the fence or even looking into it, they're just gone. And so that's been really beneficial towards us and deal flow. That owners are more willing to sell and are more reasonable when negotiating. And those conversations are just better. They're just all around more reasonable than they were at the start of the year. At the start of the year, we thought we'd grow 8 to 12% gross revenue, but we didn't think we were going to grow by 3-4 large acquisitions. Now it's opposite. We're probably not going to grow 8 to 12% revenue, but we are going to grow acquisition based, which I can take a pause in revenue growth to acquire good facilities because it'll pick right back up. We're not worried about that. So all in all for the asset, I think it actually helped. Markets were starting to get so overbuilt. You had markets in Texas that facilities were sitting just half empty, and you had other markets like I'm in Idaho, the Boise Valley, where they're at 30 square feet per capita, which we're targeting 8 square feet per capita. So just so overbuilt, and COVID helped slow that down, where people that maybe shouldn't be doing it and everything kind of got out.
Pencils
down. It was like a reset.
That's the word we've been using with our commercial brokers and guys that were in the business. Apartment transactions are down 81% from May of 2019 to May of 2020. The total number of transactions. So I don't want my audience to think, oh my God, prices are down 81%. No, just the number of transactions actually trading is down 81%. That'll pick back up, but it's been.
And you do have a lot of buyers that are not selling it.
Yeah.
So they're like, I'm going to wait.
No doubt.
So it's, this is an interesting thing when we're looking at deal flow. The deals that are going on the market, we're seeing just fraction of, but all our deals, we get off market deals. And so those deals are actually changing hands and moving faster. So it when you look out and say, brokers, what do you got as far as self-storage? And you're going, I don't got anything. And that's resonating through the industry.
No doubt. AJ, tell us a little bit more about your start. Everybody wonders, oh my God, $100 million in assets, 8,000 units, lots of cash flow, lots of assets, big equity. But how did you get started?
Got started in insurance, not real estate. So
I
sold insurance.
So did I. So you were doing life and health?
Health and welfare.
Okay.
So, I was a health and welfare puke. I, business to business, B2B. So it was, I was boring. And that was great. Me and my dad sold insurance together, and that was fun. I still own a health benefits brokerage company that I started a few years ago. We have sales guys and everything that run that. But we were looking at a way to diversify because I felt like I was on a treadmill. If I stopped selling, the income stopped coming in. That's not a good spot. And it's also really hard to grow because you can't compound that. So when looking at where we wanted to go, we were looking at a secured asset that would generate cash flow. Real estate's obviously the main one, but I also wanted business operations to be a big part of it because that's where I felt I excelled. And so self-storage lent to us very, very well. It gave us what we wanted out of real estate, but at the same time, I had more levers to affect the revenue than I did in most asset classes. And so I could develop a really good strategy, and I could really target and create a framework that was very reliable and would have large impact on those assets. Nice. And that's worked well for us.
Nice. So you and I, again, connected before the podcast, a little bit about this illness that you have. I've heard people pronounce it different ways. I've heard people mention it as Guillain-Barre Syndrome, Guillain-Barre Syndrome. And so
French word, actually. There was a French guy that found out about it in the early 1900s, but nobody listened to him.
So explain to our audience, what is this? And I want my audience to understand the reason why AJ and I connected, and one of the things that we have a connection on is my uncle went through this very similar experience that AJ is about to describe, and it was scary. It was, you're talking about, short-term and potentially long-term paralysis. You're talking about hallucination, not knowing where you're at. I remember my uncle in the hospital bed talking about how there were flies everywhere. It was wild, wild stuff. And a couple of years ago, you went through this experience, and self-storage was able to, provide for your family when you were really pretty laid up. And then I'm going to ask you a little bit more about some advice for our members. But tell us a little bit about how this illness impacted your life and how real estate helped you get through it.
Yeah, at the time, I was working for the second largest health and welfare benefits brokerage company in the world. I was running our state's department. Guillain-Barre attacks your nervous system. One day I was fine. The next day I was paralyzed. I was put on life support. So I had feeding tubes, breathing tubes, everything. I couldn't speak for over 10 weeks. And I was paralyzed from head to toe. So I had to relearn everything: to eat, to talk. I had to, I was in physical therapy for years. I had to literally relearn to do it all. My lower legs and extremities are still not quite there, but I got rid of my leg braces. I was walking with leg braces and some, other things, but we had about 10-week period where I was flatlined, as in I had no improvement, and they didn't know what was going to happen to me. So it's, it was, and this is completely out of the blue. I was never sick. I'm a healthy guy. I'm young, 33. It was the last thing in the world we would have ever thought happened to me. I thought I would have been paralyzed from skiing or something, not from this. But my boss came and, met me in the hospital to inform me that I'd lost my job. And so, it was through real estate and passive income that kept my family. We didn't have to sell our house. I have 4 kids. We were feeding them. We weren't worried about where that check was going to come in, even while my wife had to take care of me, her now, quadriplegic husband lying in a hospital bed on tubes. Right. And then after, 3-4 months and they released me home, I was still paralyzed from the chest down. So I was in bed. My brother moved in to live with us to help me try to come back, but it was, there was no way I was working. So I was done for a long time.
Are you ready to automate and explode your real estate investing? We're searching for extremely motivated individuals who are sick and tired of wasting time and want to finally see real results from their real estate investing business. We're searching for investors looking to get to the next level and become a bigger, better version of themselves while being a more successful real estate investing entrepreneur. Apply for mentoring and coaching at joshcantwellcoaching.com/podcast. That's joshcantwellcoaching.com/podcast. So the difference, I mean, this leads into my next question, which is, what kind of advice, now that you've been through that experience and you have cash flowing assets and you've built a balance sheet and you have equity and cash flow coming in, what kind of advice would you give your maybe less experienced self, and maybe specifically talk to some of our listeners that don't have 8,000 units or 2,600 units? What are some things that you would do differently? What jumps out in my mind right off the rip, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I was very transactional in my real estate investing, and also when I was a financial planner, so similar to you with your insurance experience. And I realized through all of that transactional work that when I got sick with pancreatic cancer, I'm a pancreatic cancer survivor, I couldn't make any money. It's very, very similar to your experience as well. And I realized I've got to own assets. I've got to have things that pay me cash flow every month, every week, every year. Or if this happens again, I'm going to be really upset with myself that I didn't learn my lesson, right? So what are some things that you would tell your younger, maybe less experienced self from that experience and through your investing?
Yeah, waiting doesn't help. I should have started sooner.
You're only 33, man. You didn't wait that long.
I know. And still, I think I should have started sooner. So and I think every experienced real estate person will say the same thing. I wish I would have bought more, and I wish I would have started sooner. No. It's one of those things also that I wish that I wouldn't have been. There were so many unknowns when you start that you feel like it's scary, that you feel like, am I making the right decision? That I don't know all the answers, and that's okay. But the foundationals, the things that are important, have a huge impact later on. So that there's this leverage effect in real estate and in time and in economics that over a 5-10 year period, it's really hard for us to understand that impact. And I mean, I'm doing a refinance of a couple assets right now, and we're pulling $8 million out tax free. And it's phenomenal. It's just, you don't even realize that when you're starting. And so there is this idea that, listen, you need to learn as you go. You need to get started, and you need to get started sooner than later. And you don't have a crystal ball to know the future. And that's also with your health. So you have way more risk not doing than you have. I mean, the risk of not doing is, so the risk of doing is I may lose my capital, but the risk of not doing is I risk my entire future. I risk entire upside. Your upside's infinite. So that risk scale doesn't make sense. My upsides are infinite and my downside is measurable and limited. Why would I not do that? It literally doesn't make sense, right? And that's something you don't see until later on down the road. But once you do, it's like, blows your mind. You're like, holy cow, why wasn't I was so naive, and why didn't I start earlier? Why didn't I, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because you realize all the upside that you missed out on. And that's, where even today, as long as they're good, I'm very strict on my requirements. I'm very strict on what we invest in. Risk is the most important thing to me because I understand compounding and I don't want to take a step back. But with that said, I never want to be in a position where I'm not active, where I'm not buying, where we're not improving and we're not growing. So for me, I'd say start sooner and fail forward and be okay with it. Understand that's part of the process.
Yeah, I don't know a single entrepreneur that hasn't failed multiple times, that hasn't come on this podcast and said, oh my God, I sucked at this. I failed at this. I tried that. I don't think I've ever done an interview with a single person that said, I hit a grand slam the first time I tried and I never had to work again. That doesn't happen. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, those people are just lying or they're selling something. That's not how it works. So it is. It's, I failed, and not small, and not big, really big. And it's one of those things that can either stop you or keep you moving. But this is one of the things that comes down to diversifying the source of income, because when you concentrate, if you're going after that one big end all, the odds of failing and not recovering are very big. Because you're betting it all, you're doing it all, and your odds of being able to learn from your mistakes are very, very small. And so you need to diversify your income, diversify the assets, diversify the risk, so you can keep growing and you can keep compounding. That's why jobs are bad. You have no control, so you have all the risk, and It's one single source. So the odds of you leaving your job or getting fired or the job going away or the company going away are astronomically high. I mean, I've never met someone that worked from one company their entire life. I've never met them. So from my experience, that's 100% guarantee that that job's going to go away, whether by you or somebody else. So that's a bad risk and a bad investment. Whereas when you own your revenue source, it may not work out perfect, but you own it. And if you do it right, it's never going away. So, I mean, you can measure the risk, and really in real estate, risk is debt. So as long as you control it, if you have real estate and there's no debt at all on it, it may not give you great returns, but there's no risk.
Right.
And so it's, one of those things where you can find a middle ground, you can keep growing and you can do it to your preference. And the risk is a fraction of what it is to even have a job. So it just makes no sense not to do it.
Yeah, phenomenal stuff, AJ. I appreciate that. Listen, AJ, I'm sure your book is out. It's already a bestseller. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will want to pick that up. You'll hear everything and more that AJ and I talked about today on this interview, from how to find deals, case studies, raising money, his experience with his, Guillain-Barre Syndrome, everything that he's learned along the way stuffed inside of his book. AJ, is there a spot where they can go grab a copy of that book somewhere?
Yeah, you can go to Amazon. It's the Investor's Guide to Growing Wealth in Self-Storage. It's blue. That's how you remember it. Or you can go to my site, SelfStorage Income, or the podcast. It's the largest podcast in self-storage by far. We're bigger than all other self-storage podcasts combined. That's also SelfStorage Income. And I don't, unlike a lot of gurus, things like that, I don't have a big funnel. I'm not selling things. So I built what I called Ultimate Playbook. It's 184 pages, and it's the numbers. I put everything in. There's no upsell. I'm like, for me, and after my experience, I made a promise in the hospital that I'm like, I'm going to give this stuff out. If somebody wants more help, we can have conversations. Or if they want me to do a deal, obviously I don't work for free, but I don't hold any information. I actually pay for that information to go out, and we give it all away. So that was lacking in the self-storage space. There was nobody that compiled information, and there's so many questions, and people felt they couldn't get into the space because they didn't have good information. So I thought, we're just going to build this. And that's what the book is. It's literally the step-by-step playbook for anyone to own, operate, manage, buy, get investors, and become an expert in the space.
Fantastic stuff, AJ. Listen, thanks so much for joining me today on Accelerated Investor. I appreciate you having you and sharing your ideas with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I hope you enjoyed this interview with AJ Osbourne and myself, Josh Cantwell, on the Accelerated Investor podcast. Absolutely had a phenomenal time interviewing AJ. If you enjoyed the interview, please go right now to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review, 5-star rating. Leave us a review. Let us know how AJ and I did on this interview. If you have questions, comments about AJ or about me or about our interview and how we did, we really would love to hear your feedback. And also, if you could go and share this on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, share this with your friends and family so we could spread the word about Accelerated Investor. I would greatly appreciate that. And we'll see you on the next episode of Accelerated Investor. Take care. Hey, Josh here, and do you want to win a free Accelerated Investor t-shirt? All you have to do is give Accelerated Investor, our podcast, Accelerated Investor, a rating and a review on iTunes, okay? Do that now. Then send us a screenshot on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. What we're going to do then is every week we're going to pick our favorite rating and review, and we're going to send that person a free t-shirt. And maybe, again, some other cool, fun stuff as well from Accelerated Investors. So, again, don't forget to take a screenshot. Leave a rating, review, take a screenshot, send it to us so we know exactly who you are. And then once a week, every week on the podcast, we will announce a new winner. Don't forget to take a screenshot and send it to us so we know exactly who you are. We'll announce a new winner every week.
You've been listening to Josh Cantwell and the Accelerated Investor Podcast. Leave a comment on our iTunes channel and let us know what you want to learn next or who you'd like Josh to interview. While you're there, give us a 5-star rating and make sure to subscribe so you can be the first to hear new episodes. Follow Josh Cantwell and his companies, Strategic Real Estate Coach and Freeland Ventures, on all social media platforms now, and stay up to date on new training and investment opportunities. To start your journey toward the lifestyle you've always dreamed of, apply for coaching at joshcantwellcoaching.com.